Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Chaos Drive and I'm working on a cyberpunk themed Metroidvania / RPG. It's been a while since my last devlog because I was on spring break, but I have some great new features to showcase. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before I get into this devlog, if you haven't seen my previous devlogs, I highly recommend watching those first so that everything makes sense. Anyways, so in the last devlog, I created a character customization system. It looked great, and I'm really satisfied with how it turned out. But it was missing something pretty important. A stats screen, so that the player can set their beginning stats and attributes. So this is the first thing I worked on. I wanted the player to have 5 different stats: vitality, or health, strength, dexterity, or speed, tech, and luck. I love it when video games have stats that change the playstyle and game systems. I want these stats to affect as many things as possible. For instance, dexterity is going to affect how fast the player moves and also how fast the player attacks. Luck will affect critical hit chance and loot drops, and probably a lot more than just that. Most of the work was making the art, but after getting it all in the game, here's what it looks like. It's pretty good. I think I could definitely polish it up in the future. Starting each stat at 5 and also giving the player 5 points to spend however they like. Of course, none of these stats actually affect the game yet. But before implementing these stats into the game, there's a couple things I want to get done. The first thing is player damage. Up until now, the player hasn't been able to take damage from enemies, so that's next on the list. The first thing I did was jump into Spine to animate the player getting hit. I wanted to have 2 animations. One for if the player takes a small amount of damage, and one for if the player takes a large amount of damage. After animating them, I jumped into Game Maker Studio and started coding. I basically just had to add another state to the player called the hit state, in which he can't move, attack, or dodge until the hit animation is over. I made it so if the hit takes more than 30% of the player's remaining life, it counts as a big hit. Besides this, I also implemented a health bar for the player so I could see how much damage he was taking. The last thing I did was make it so when the player hits an enemy or gets hit, a little hit marker pops up that shows the damage. Here's what it looks like in-game. This is a small hit, and this is a big hit. Looks pretty good. On to the next feature. This next feature is pretty much the star of this devlog. It's a feature that I talked about adding briefly way back in the second devlog. Guns. Now, I still want the main focus to be on the melee weapons, but the guns will serve as an extra tool to help you in combat. The first gun I decided to add was a basic pistol, so I went back to Spine for the animations. I made an animation for taking the gun out. I made an idle animation, and then, of course, a shooting animation. Once I had these ready, it didn't take long to implement it to the game. I added yet another state to the player for when he has the gun out. For the bullets, I took a different approach than I usually do. The way I coded bullets before is I would have a separate bullet object that I would create near the gun, and it would have a set speed and direction. This usually worked fine, but if I ever wanted to make a very fast-moving bullet, let's say a bullet that moves 20 pixels per game step, if there was a solid object that was less than 20 pixels wide, the bullet might pass through without colliding. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. So the way I'm doing bullets for this game is with a collision line, meaning the bullets are lines that flash and instantly extend until they collide with something. To do this, when the bullet is created, I just keep increasing the length of the line by 1 until it collided with either a solid object or an enemy. Anyway, with that explained, here's how it looks in-game. I made it so you have to hold down the right click to pull your gun out, and then left click to shoot. It looks great and all, but you might have noticed that the shorter enemies like this slime can't be hit by the bullet. This caused a dilemma, because the obvious solution was to make it so you could aim the gun to wherever the mouse is, but that would require rotating the arm bone in the player's skeletal animation from Spine. There are ways to do this using code, but it requires a lot of tweaking values and trial and error, so I tried to think of other ways. The solution I came up with was to make it so if the player holds down shift, they crouch so that they can shoot the gun at a lower level. So I jumped into Spine again and made animations for the crouching. It didn't take long, but after implementing, this is what happened. Let this be a lesson to all the game developers out there. Always measure first. So then I redid the animations, and here's how it looks. Not bad. It works, but it can definitely be better. I played with the gun system for a while before I realized that it needed to change. I decided that I would just sit down and dive into the coding of the bone animation to make it so the player could aim. It took me about 2 hours of frustration before I got it to look right. And finally, here is the final product of the gun shooting. After finally getting this done, I made another gun, an assault rifle that shoots faster. Adding the guns was a huge milestone and a big success. There's still a lot to do with it, but the base is finished now. After that, the next most important thing to add was some type of inventory system. I plan on having tons of equipment such as armor, weapons, and more. So an inventory system was really important. The first thing I did was make the art. I came up with this digital screen looking thing with different tabs for different menus. The inventory would be the first tab. After finishing that up, I put it into Game Makers to start the coding process. I made a classic list inventory system. On the left there would be different equipment slots like primary weapon, secondary weapon, head, torso, etc. Then in the middle would be a list of all the items that you have with that category. The maximum items you can have in any one category is 12, so I think I'll have to make a way to drop items in the future. Anyway, after a lot of coding and UI design, here's the working inventory. This box on the right shows the image and stats of the currently selected item. I also displayed the player character on the right so you can see what you look like as you're selecting equipment. After the rough inventory system was finished, I spent some time implementing the player stats and having them affect things in-game. For instance, the dexterity stat now affects how fast you move and attack. But I also added a weight to each armor piece and weapon that decreases your speed. This creates more dynamic equipment and forces the player to be more strategic when choosing which equipment to use. There's also a defense stat on each armor piece that decreases the amount of damage the player takes. Strength now serves as a multiplier to your weapon's damage. Vitality determines how much health you have now. And lastly, the player can perform critical hits on enemies now, depending on how high your luck stat is. I had a lot of fun designing all the stats and having them affect things in-game. It makes the game feel more alive and natural. In the future, I also plan on adding status effects to some weapons that can be inflicted on enemies, such as like burn or poison. But there was one more thing I worked on in this devlog. I implemented a dialogue system. This system allows for player choice and branching paths. I love branching dialogue in games. It just makes the game world feel more real. Dialogue systems are not easy to code or create, but I found some tutorials by Peyton Burnham that really go into depth on how to create one of these. I really recommend watching his videos, and I will post a link in the description for anybody interested. At this point, I'm just about ready to start working on the actual game story, which is something I've been excited about for so long. I'm not sure yet how I'm going to address my progress on the game story in the devlogs because I don't want to reveal too much and spoil the game, but regardless, I'm going to keep posting my progress on the game. This was a pretty packed devlog with a lot of important features and milestones, and I definitely look forward to creating even more. As always, to those who made it to the end, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in devlog number 6.